I'm crouched in the wine cellar beneath Dante Russo's mansion, with my hands covered in blood that isn't mine. The metallic scent mixing with the earthy smell of aged oak and expensive wine, when I hear his footsteps on the stairs. Deliberate. Measured. The kind of footsteps that belong to a man who has never rushed toward anything in his life. Because everything and everyone waits for him. The single overhead bulb flickers like a dying heartbeat, casting shadows that dance across the stone walls like demons performing some ancient ritual. And I should run. I should scream. I should do literally anything except stay frozen here like a statue made of fear and adrenaline. But all I can do is stare at the body slumped against the oak barrels and wonder how my life became a nightmare dressed up in designer heels and a salary that finally let me breathe after drowning in student loans for 6 years. 6 months ago, I was Arya Chen, former social worker turned executive secretary, a woman who had convinced herself that working for a powerful man with questionable connections was simply pragmatic survival in a world that didn't care about my master's degree in social work or my passion for helping people. And now I'm Arya Chen, accessory to whatever the hell this is. My cream silk blouse probably ruined beyond repair. My hands shaking so violently that I can barely keep them pressed against this girl's wounds, even though every instinct I have is screaming at me to apply pressure, to keep her conscious, to do all the things they taught me in the mandatory first aid training I took when I still believed I could save the world one broken person at a time. The girl, and she is a girl, maybe 20 if I'm being generous, with dark hair matted with sweat and blood, and eyes that hold the kind of terror I used to see in the faces of trafficking victims during my brief, soul-crushing stint with Child Protective Services, is whimpering softly. A sound that cuts through me like a knife made of all my failures. All the people I couldn't save. All the cases that got closed because there wasn't enough evidence or funding or political will to do the right thing. I found her because I broke the rules, because I've spent 6 months working for Dante Russo and learning that there are 3 sacred commandments in his world. Never ask questions about the men who visit his private office after midnight. Never enter that office when the red light above the door is illuminated. And never, under any circumstances, open the door to the basement beneath his sprawling mansion in the hills overlooking the city. Tonight, I broke rule number 3 because I heard crying. Soft, desperate, feminine crying that sounded like every nightmare I used to have during my social work days, the ones where I could hear children screaming, but could never find them in time. And my instincts kicked in before my common sense could grab them by the throat and drag them back to safety. The door was cracked open just enough to let a sliver of golden light spill into the hallway where I was working late, organizing files for tomorrow's meeting with some businessman whose company name I recognized from money laundering investigations. I definitely wasn't supposed to know about. And the sound pulled me toward it like a siren song designed specifically to destroy women who still believe they can make a difference in a world built on suffering and silence. The descent into Dante's basement felt like walking into hell with my eyes wide open, each click of my Louboutin heels against the stone steps echoing like gunshots in a cathedral. The temperature dropping with every step until I could see my breath misting in the air and feel goosebumps rising on my arms beneath the thin fabric of my blouse. And the crying grew louder, more desperate, punctuated by sounds that made my stomach turn and my social worker brain catalog automatically. Shortness of breath indicating panic attack, vocal strain suggesting prolonged distress, the wet quality that meant tears and possibly blood. I should have turned back, should have called the police, should have done literally anything except continue down those stairs into the private domain of a man who could buy and sell me 10 times over. A man whose dark eyes held secrets that would probably get me killed if I ever learned them. A man who made my pulse race every time he leaned over my desk to sign documents, and I caught the scent of his cologne. Sandalwood and something darker, more dangerous, like smoke and expensive whiskey and poor life choices wrapped up in a 6'3" package of controlled violence and devastating good looks. But I didn't turn back because that's never been who I am. Even when it should be. even when my therapist tells me that my compulsive need to save people is actually a trauma response from growing up with an addict mother I could never fix, even when turning back would be the smart, safe, sensible thing to do. Because I stopped being smart and safe and sensible the moment I took this job, knowing exactly what kind of man Dante Russo is. The kind of man whose business empire spans legitimate real estate and restaurants, but whose real power comes from the shadows. From the whispered conversations and cash transactions and people who disappear when they become inconvenient. I found her tied to a chair in the center of a wine cellar that probably costs more than most people's houses, surrounded by bottles that collectors would kill for, which, given the circumstances, might not be entirely metaphorical. And she was bruised, bleeding, her wrists raw from rope burns, her lip split, her eye swelling shut, wearing a dress that had been expensive before someone tore it, before someone hurt her, before someone decided she was disposable enough to leave tied up in a basement like a piece of furniture nobody wanted anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the knots, my fingers slipping on rope made slick with her blood and sweat. And she was begging me in broken English mixed with what I thought might be Russian or Ukrainian. Please, please, hurry. He'll come back. They always come back. And I was making promises I had no business making. Telling her it would be okay. That I would get her out. That she was safe now. All the lies I used to tell children in foster care before I learned that promising safety in an unsafe world is just another form of cruelty. I was so focused on the knots, on getting her free, on figuring out how the hell I was going to get both of us out of this mansion and to the police without getting killed, that I didn't hear the door at the top of the stairs opening until it was too late. Didn't process the change in air pressure or the way the girl's eyes suddenly fixed on something behind me with an expression that made my blood run cold. Didn't understand that everything I thought I knew about this moment was wrong until I heard his voice. Aria, Dante Russo said, my name rolling off his tongue like a prayer, or a threat, or maybe both. That slight Italian accent making the syllables sound like music, even though the context suggested this should be my funeral dirge. And I turned slowly because sudden movements around dangerous men are a good way to get hurt or killed, and I'm many things, but suicidal isn't one of them. Turned to find him standing at the bottom of the stairs in a three-piece Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my car, looking like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom instead of discovering his secretary attempting to free what I assumed was one of his victims from his private basement torture chamber. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and his eyes, those devastating dark eyes that I'd spent 6 months trying not to stare at during meetings, assessed the scene with the cold precision of a man who had seen worse, done worse, been worse, and filed it all away in some mental catalog of atrocities that apparently included finding his employee elbow-deep in a rescue mission she had no business conducting. "What are you doing in my basement?" he asked, in that dangerously quiet voice he used when he was truly angry, the one I'd only heard him use twice before, once with a business partner who tried to cheat him, and once with a man who'd made an inappropriate comment about my legs in front of the entire office. And both times the person on the receiving end of that voice had looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor, which was exactly how I felt in this moment, except I couldn't disappear because I was currently covered in blood and kneeling next to evidence of what I assumed was human trafficking or kidnapping or some other horrific crime that I was now implicated in, simply by being here. I opened my mouth to explain, to defend myself, to say literally anything that might make this situation less catastrophic than it appeared, my mind racing through possible explanations that ranged from "I got lost looking for the bathroom," to "I was conducting a citizen's arrest," to "Please don't kill me. I have student loans and my mother needs her medication and I'm too young to die." But before I could formulate any coherent response, the girl behind me did something that made my entire world tilt sideways on its axis and shatter into pieces that I would spend the next 6 months trying to reassemble into something that made sense. She laughed, actually laughed, a bright, clear sound that belonged at a cocktail party or a comedy show, not in a basement torture chamber. And I whirled around so fast I nearly lost my balance, watched in complete disbelief as she reached up with hands that should have been too injured to move and untied the remaining ropes with casual efficiency, standing up and stretching like she'd just woken from a particularly refreshing nap, instead of being bound and beaten in a wine cellar. "Took you long enough," she said to Dante, her voice completely different from the terrified, broken whimpers she'd been making just moments before, now filled with amusement and something that sounded almost like pride. And she pulled a cloth from somewhere in her torn dress and began wiping the blood from her face. Blood that came off far too easily, I realized with growing horror. Blood that had the wrong consistency. Blood that was clearly, obviously, devastatingly fake. "She's perfect, Dante," the girl continued, grinning at me like we were sharing some inside joke instead of standing in the wreckage of what I now understood was an elaborate setup. A test. A fucking audition for a role I hadn't even known I was playing. And she gestured at me with the blood-stained cloth like I was a particularly impressive piece of merchandise she'd selected from a catalog. "Just like you said she would be, that bleeding heart syndrome is real." She didn't hesitate for even a second. Walked right into danger to save someone she didn't know. Someone who could have been bait or a trap or literally anything except what she appeared to be, which, I guess, is exactly what I was. She laughed again, delighted with herself, with the whole situation, with my complete and utter humiliation. And I felt something inside me crack. Not break, because I'd been broken before by this world and its casual cruelties, but crack, like ice forming over a lake, cold and hard and protective. My blood ran cold as I realized this was a test, that everything from the crying to the blood to the ropes had been carefully staged, that I'd been manipulated and observed and judged like a rat in a laboratory maze. And I looked from the girl who was clearly an actress or a sociopath or possibly both, to Dante Russo standing at the base of the stairs with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite apologetic, but not quite satisfied either. Something complicated and layered that suggested this whole sick performance meant something beyond just humiliating his secretary for entertainment purposes. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through college and graduate school and 6 years of crushing disappointment in the social work field, was screaming at me to quit, to walk out, to report this to someone even though I had no idea who you report psychological torture by your Mafia boss employer to. But there was another part of me, a darker, more curious part that I usually kept locked away, that wanted to know what came next, wanted to understand why Dante Russo had gone to such elaborate lengths to test whether his secretary would risk her life to save a stranger, wanted to know what kind of role required that specific brand of stupid, reckless courage that had always been both my greatest strength and my most fatal flaw. "Come upstairs, Arya," Dante said. And it wasn't a request. His hand already extended toward me like he was asking me to dance instead of climb out of the basement where he just orchestrated my complete psychological breakdown. And despite every instinct telling me to run, despite the blood still on my hands and the adrenaline still coursing through my veins and the humiliation burning in my chest like acid, I found myself taking his hand, feeling his warm fingers close around mine with surprising gentleness, letting him pull me to my feet and guide me toward the stairs, while the girl, Gia, I would later learn her name was Gia, followed behind us, still wiping fake blood from her face and humming something that might have been an aria from an opera, or might have been a funeral march. As we climbed toward the light, toward whatever explanation or justification or new nightmare awaited me in Dante Russo's office, I realized that I'd just crossed some invisible line that separated my old life from whatever was coming next. And the most terrifying part wasn't that I didn't know what that new life would hold, but that some reckless, self-destructive part of me couldn't wait to find out. My hands are still shaking as Dante guides me upstairs to his office with his hand resting on the small of my back. Possessive, controlling, burning through the thin fabric of my blouse like a brand that marks me as something I'm not entirely sure I want to be marked as, and I'm acutely aware of every point of contact between us. The way his fingers spread across my spine with practiced familiarity. The way his body moves beside mine with the fluid grace of a predator who has never questioned his right to any space he chooses to occupy. And I'm trying to reconcile this man who just orchestrated my complete psychological breakdown with the man who once stayed late to help me find a lost file because he knew I was stressed about an audit, who remembers how I take my coffee without being told, who quietly increased my salary by 30% 3 months ago without explanation or expectation of anything in return except continued competence. The girl from the basement, Gia, though I still don't know that yet, still think of her as the actress who made me believe she was dying, follows behind us with the casual confidence of someone who belongs in this world of tests and manipulations and casual psychological torture, wiping the fake blood from her face with a towel she produced from somewhere, humming under her breath like we've just finished watching a particularly entertaining play, instead of participating in what I'm pretty sure qualifies as some form of workplace harassment that I could probably sue for if I wasn't terrified that suing Dante Russo would result in me disappearing into a foundation somewhere. His office is exactly what you'd expect from a man who treats human psychology like a chess game. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights that stretch out like a carpet of stars. Dark wood furniture that probably costs more than most people's houses. Leather chairs that smell like money and power, and all the things I convinced myself I didn't care about when I was 22, and idealistic and believed that passion and dedication could substitute for financial security. Dante moves to the bar in the corner, all smooth efficiency and controlled movements, pouring amber liquid into crystal glasses that catch the light and throw fractured rainbows across the ceiling. And I notice details I've somehow missed during the hundreds of times I've been in this office. The faint scar above his left eyebrow that suggests violence in his past. The way his shoulders carry tension despite his calm exterior. The family photograph on his desk that's turned just slightly away from where visitors sit, like he wants to see it, but doesn't want others examining it too closely. He hands me a glass of what I assume is whiskey, his fingers brushing mine in a way that might be accidental, except I'm starting to suspect nothing this man does is accidental. And when I open my mouth to protest that I don't drink whiskey, that I have to drive home, that I'm still processing the fact that I was just manipulated into revealing my deepest character traits for reasons I don't understand, he gives me a look that makes it clear this isn't a suggestion. "Drink," he says in that voice that somehow manages to be both command and invitation. And I drink because my hands are still shaking, and because the burn of expensive whiskey down my throat feels like the kind of pain I can understand and control, unlike everything else about this situation. And because some part of me recognizes that whatever comes next, I'm going to need the artificial courage that comes from a glass of liquor that probably costs more per ounce than I make per hour. Gia sprawls in one of the leather chairs with the unself-conscious grace of someone who has spent her entire life in spaces like this, places where comfort and luxury are assumed rather than aspirational, and she's watching me with undisguised curiosity, like I'm a particularly interesting specimen she's been studying and can't quite figure out, which I suppose is fair given that she just spent the last 20 minutes pretending to be a trafficking victim, while I had a complete breakdown trying to save her. "I needed to know what kind of woman you are, Arya," Dante tells me, moving to stand at the windows with his back to me, hands in his pockets, silhouetted against the city lights in a way that would be romantic if I wasn't currently furious and terrified and confused in equal measure. And his voice carries that slight Italian accent that becomes more pronounced when he's tired, or emotional, or apparently, when he's explaining why he just traumatized his secretary for fun and profit. Whether you'd run when faced with danger, whether you'd call the police and try to handle it through proper channels that we both know are corrupted beyond redemption, or whether you'd try to save someone you thought was in danger even if it meant risking everything you've built for yourself here, your salary, your safety, your life. He turns to face me then, and the look in his eyes makes my breath catch somewhere between my lungs and my throat, because I've seen Dante Russo angry, and I've seen him cold, and I've seen him wear the mask of a civilized businessman. But I've never seen him look vulnerable before. Never seen the raw honesty that's currently written across his face like a confession he's not sure he should be making. "You chose to save her," he continues, moving closer with each word until he's standing directly in front of me, close enough that I can smell his cologne. That intoxicating mixture of sandalwood and something darker that I've never been able to identify, but that invades my dreams more often than I want to admit, and close enough that I have to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, which puts me at a disadvantage that I suspect he's counting on. You didn't hesitate? Didn't weigh the costs and benefits? Didn't think about the fact that helping her could get you killed or implicate you in whatever you thought was happening in that basement? You just acted, immediately, instinctively, because that's who you are at your core. Arya Chen, former social worker who couldn't save everyone, so you stopped trying to save anyone. Secretary who took a job with a man she knew was dangerous because the money was good, and the alternative was drowning in debt while your mother's medical bills piled up, and your own dreams died a slow, painful death of financial starvation. The fact that he knows all of this about me, knows about my mother's illness and my student loans and the career I abandoned because passion doesn't pay for chemotherapy, should probably terrify me. But instead I feel something else entirely. Seen, understood, recognized in a way that makes me want to simultaneously run away and lean closer. That tells me everything I need to know, he says, and Gia is watching us, with an expression that suggests she's seeing something she expected, something she and Dante discussed before they set up their elaborate basement theater production. And I realize with growing certainty that whatever is about to happen has been planned for longer than just tonight. That I've been observed and evaluated and judged for months, without ever knowing I was being tested. Dante reaches out and takes the empty whiskey glass from my hand, setting it aside. And then he does something I don't expect. He takes both my hands in his, the hands that are still stained with fake blood that looks disturbingly real in the low light of his office, and he holds them gently, carefully, like there's something precious rather than evidence of my gullibility and his manipulation. The job I hired you for 6 months ago, he says, and I can feel his thumbs tracing small circles on the backs of my hands in a gesture that's probably meant to be comforting, but instead sends electricity racing up my arms and straight into my chest, where my heart is doing complicated things I don't have time to analyze. Was never the real job I needed you for. I have a dozen people who can file papers and schedule meetings and manage my calendar with ruthless efficiency. People who have been with me for years, and who know better than to ask questions about the men who visit after midnight, or the calls I take in Italian that always end with someone sounding like they're receiving very bad news. He pauses, and I can see him choosing his words carefully, weighing how much truth to give me, how much I can handle, how far he can push before I break entirely and run screaming into the night. What I don't have, what I've been searching for desperately for the last 2 years, is someone I can trust with my most dangerous secret. Someone who has the training and the instincts and the fundamental moral compass to help me do something that will probably get us both killed, but that I can't not do anymore. Not after everything I've seen. Everything I've been complicit in. Everything I've allowed to happen because I was too much of a coward to act until I met someone who made me believe that redemption might actually be possible. Gia stands up then, moving toward the door, and she pauses to look back at us with an expression that's softer than anything I've seen from her so far, almost pitying, like she knows something about what's coming that makes her feel sorry for both of us. "Good luck, cousin," she says to Dante, and the word cousin rearranges everything I thought I understood about tonight, because if she's family, then this test was even more calculated than I realized, even more important. And then she's gone. The door closing behind her with a soft click that sounds terribly final, and I'm alone with Dante Russo and whatever truth he's about to tell me, whatever life-altering information he's been holding back, whatever reason he had for making me believe I was saving a life when really I was auditioning for a role in something so much bigger and more dangerous than I could have possibly imagined. "My father," Dante says, and the way his jaw clenches when he mentions his father tells me everything I need to know about their relationship before he elaborates. Runs one of the most profitable human trafficking operations on the East Coast, moving girls, some as young as 14, 15, from Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, selling them to men who see human beings as disposable commodities, as things to be used and discarded, as less than animals because at least animals have protection under the law. He releases my hands and turns away, running his fingers through his hair in a gesture of frustration that makes him look younger, more human, less like the untouchable crime boss, and more like a man who's drowning in guilt and searching desperately for a life raft. I've spent the last 15 years building power within his organization, becoming indispensable, making myself into exactly the kind of son he always wanted. Ruthless, efficient, willing to do whatever it takes to expand the empire. All while systematically documenting everything, identifying every player, every route, every safe house, every corrupt official on the payroll, building a case that could bring down the entire operation and everyone involved in it. He turns back to face me, and the expression on his face is something between desperation and determination. The look of a man who's been carrying an impossible burden for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to stand up straight. But documentation isn't enough, he continues, his voice raw with an emotion I can't quite name. Because bringing down the operation doesn't help the victims who are already trapped in it, doesn't save the girls who are being held in safe houses and private clubs and mansions owned by men who believe their money makes them untouchable. I need someone who understands trauma, who knows how to work with trafficking victims, who has the training and the instincts to help me extract these girls and get them into real protection, real rehabilitation. Not just another system that will fail them the way every system has failed them up until now. He steps closer again, and I can see the silver scar above his eyebrow more clearly now, can imagine the violence that caused it, can picture a younger Dante learning the hard way that his world runs on blood and pain and suffering. I need someone who cares about saving people more than they fear the consequences of trying. Someone who'll break the rules when the rules are wrong. Someone who walked into a basement tonight not knowing if they'd walk back out, because someone needed help, and that was enough reason to risk everything. The implications of what he's telling me crash over me like a wave, each one more terrifying than the last. He wants me to help him betray his own father, to participate in what amounts to corporate espionage, except the corporation is a criminal empire, and the penalty for getting caught isn't unemployment but death, to use my barely remembered social work training to help extract and rehabilitate trafficking victims, while presumably dodging bullets, and lying to dangerous men, and generally doing everything that made me leave social work in the first place. Except now, with the added bonus of organized crime and family betrayal, and a boss who apparently thinks the best way to recruit someone for an insane mission is to traumatize them in a wine cellar. I should walk away, should run away, should grab my purse and my dignity and whatever remains of my sanity, and get as far from Dante Russo and his savior complex, and his devastating eyes as humanly possible. But instead I find myself asking the one question that I know will seal my fate one way or another. Why me? I ask. And my voice sounds steadier than I feel. Sounds like it belongs to a woman who isn't currently reconsidering every life choice that led her to this moment. You said you've been looking for 2 years. Why am I the one who passed your test? Why am I the person you trust with this? Why does it have to be me specifically when there must be dozens of former social workers in this city who need money and have questionable judgment? It's not the most important question I could ask. I should be asking about safety protocols and exit strategies and what happens to me if his father finds out. But it's the question that matters most in this moment, because I need to understand what he sees in me that I don't see in myself. What quality I possess that makes him think I'm capable of surviving in his world when I can barely survive in my own. Dante moves to his desk and pulls out a file folder. One I recognize because I've seen it before in his locked cabinet. The one marked with my name that I always assumed was just standard employment documentation, but that I now realize must contain something more comprehensive. Something that explains how he knows about my mother and my debts and my failed social work career in such intimate detail. He opens it and pulls out photographs, and my breath catches in my throat because they're pictures of me from before I worked for him. Me at my old job at Child Protective Services, looking exhausted and heartbroken. Me testifying in court for a case I eventually lost. Me sitting in my car outside the hospital where my mother was receiving treatment, head on the steering wheel, shoulders shaking in a way that suggests I was crying. Though I don't remember who took these pictures or when or why anyone would have been documenting the lowest points of my life. I've been watching you for almost a year before I hired you, he admits. And this should feel like a violation, should make me angry, but instead I'm fascinated in a horrified sort of way, the way you can't look away from a car crash. I saw you fight for children that the system had already given up on, saw you bend and break rules because following them meant letting kids slip through the cracks, saw you burn yourself out trying to save people in a system designed to process them rather than protect them. And I saw the exact moment you broke. The moment you realized you couldn't keep fighting a losing battle. The moment you chose survival over purpose because martyrdom doesn't pay for chemotherapy. He looks at me with an intensity that makes me want to hide and be seen in equal measure. You walked away from purpose because you had to, not because you wanted to, and I knew that if I could offer you both, if I could give you the resources and protection to actually save people without the bureaucratic bullshit that made it impossible before, you wouldn't be able to refuse, because women like you don't know how to walk away when someone needs saving, even when walking away would be the smart thing to do. He's right. And I hate that he's right. Hate that he's read me so completely and accurately. Hate that he's standing there offering me exactly what I've wanted since I left social work. A chance to actually help people with real resources behind me, to save victims without watching them disappear back into the system that failed them in the first place, to do the work I was meant to do without the soul-crushing limitations that made it impossible before. But I also hate that he's asking me to do it in partnership with a mafia boss who surveilled me for a year and staged an elaborate psychological test, and who's currently looking at me like I'm simultaneously his salvation and his damnation. Like my answer to his insane proposal matters more than anything else in his carefully constructed criminal empire. I need to think about this, I say, because I'm not ready to commit to something that could get me killed. Not ready to trust a man who manipulates people for a living. Not ready to acknowledge that some reckless part of me has already made the decision and is just waiting for my rational brain to catch up and accept the inevitable. Dante nods like he expected this, like he's planned for this too, and he reaches into his desk and pulls out another file, this one much thicker, and slides it across the polished wood toward me with the careful deliberation of a man presenting evidence in a trial where I'm both judge and jury. Take this home, he says, and his voice has shifted into something that sounds almost like pleading, which is wrong because men like Dante Russo don't plead, they command and expect obedience. But here he is, pleading with me to read whatever's in that file, to consider his offer seriously, to not walk away from what he's building. Read about the girls we could save. Look at the documentation I've compiled. See the scope of what my father has built and what I'm trying to tear down. And then tell me if you can walk away, knowing you could have helped and chose not to. Tell me you can live with that choice, and I'll never mention this again. I'll let you go back to being just my secretary, filing papers and scheduling meetings and pretending you don't know what kind of man I am, what kind of world I live in, what kind of horrors exist just below the surface of the polished exterior we present to the world. I take the file because refusing it would be making a decision, and I'm not ready to make that decision yet. Need time to process and think and maybe drink an entire bottle of wine while I reconsider every choice I've made since the day I walked into Dante Russo's office for my first interview and felt something shift in my chest when he smiled at me, like he could see straight through every defense I'd carefully constructed. As I turned to leave, file clutched against my chest like a shield. Dante says my name one more time, soft and low and filled with something that sounds dangerously close to affection. And when I look back at him, he's standing there in his perfect suit, in his perfect office overlooking his city, looking less like a crime boss and more like a man who's terrified I'm about to walk out of his life and take his last chance at redemption with me. For what it's worth, he says, and the vulnerability in his voice makes my heart do that complicated thing again, where it forgets that falling for your mafia boss is the worst possible idea in a lifetime of bad ideas. I'm sorry for the test in the basement, sorry for scaring you, sorry for making you believe you were failing to save someone when really you were succeeding at exactly what I needed you to succeed at. But I'm not sorry for choosing you, for seeing in you what you've apparently stopped seeing in yourself, for believing that together we might actually be able to save people who've been told their entire lives that they're not worth saving. He pauses, and I can see him weighing whether to say the next part, whether it's too much truth too soon. And I'm not sorry for wanting you to say yes for reasons that have nothing to do with trafficking victims and everything to do with the way you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not watching. Like you can't decide if you want to save me or destroy me. Like maybe in your world those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I leave without responding, because I don't trust myself to say anything that won't either commit me to his insane plan or reveal that he's absolutely right about the way I look at him, about the complicated knot of attraction and fear and curiosity that's been living in my chest since the day I met him, about the fact that some part of me has been waiting for him to see me as something more than his secretary, even if the more in question involves international crime and family betrayal and very possibly getting murdered in a variety of creative ways. I drive home with the file on my passenger seat, and I don't open it that night because I know that once I do, once I see the faces of the girls he wants to save and read the documentation of his father's empire and understand the full scope of what he's asking me to risk, I won't be able to walk away, won't be able to choose the safe option, won't be able to ignore the part of me that became a social worker in the first place because I believed that everyone deserves to be saved and that someone has to be willing to try even when the odds are impossible. I open the file at 2 a.m. because I can't sleep, because my hands still feel like they're covered in fake blood, because Dante's voice is echoing in my head saying, "Women like you don't know how to walk away when someone needs saving." And the first thing I see is a photograph of a girl who can't be more than 15, dark circles under her eyes, bruises barely concealed by makeup, wearing an evening gown that cost more than my car, and an expression that suggests she's already dead inside even though her body is still breathing. And I know with absolute certainty that I'm going to say yes to Dante's proposal, going to risk everything I've built for myself, going to walk willingly into his dangerous world because that girl deserves someone to fight for her, and apparently I'm still stupid enough to believe I can be that someone. The file contains 23 more photographs just like the first one, 23 more girls with dead eyes and expensive clothes and bruises they've learned to hide. And by the time the sun comes up, I've read every page of documentation, memorized every face, understood exactly what Dante is asking me to help him destroy, and exactly what we stand to lose if we fail. And I realize that at some point during the night, I stopped thinking of it as his plan and started thinking of it as ours, which means I've already made my decision even if I haven't admitted it out loud yet. When I walk into Dante's office the next morning with the file in my hands and my answer on my lips, he's standing at the window again, and he turns when he hears me enter with an expression that's equal parts hope and dread, like he's not sure which answer he wants more, for me to say yes and join him in his dangerous mission, or for me to say no and save myself from whatever darkness he knows is coming. But I don't give him the answer immediately because I need to establish something first. Need to make him understand that if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to help him betray his father, and save these girls, and risk everything I am, then it's going to be on my terms, with my rules, with clear boundaries that protect what's left of my soul and my sanity. "I'll help you," I say, watching his entire body relax in relief. So profound it's almost painful to witness. But I have conditions, and if you can't agree to them, then the answer is no, and you need to find someone else to be your redemption project, or your partner in crime, or whatever role you've decided I'm supposed to fill in this elaborate plan of yours. I move closer, and I can see the wariness in his eyes now, the uncertainty about what I'm going to demand, whether it'll be something he can give or something that will destroy this fragile alliance before it even begins. First condition: I'm not your employee anymore. I'm your partner in this, which means equal say in decisions that affect the victims, equal access to information, equal responsibility for the outcomes, whether they're good or catastrophic. And you don't get to pull rank or use your power or your money or your connections to override me when we disagree about how to help these girls, because I'm the one with the training and the instincts for this work. And if you don't trust my judgment, then you shouldn't have recruited me in the first place. Dante nods slowly, and I can see him processing this, recalculating whatever power dynamic he'd envisioned, adjusting to the reality that I'm not going to be a passive participant in his plan, but an active force that will push back when necessary. And I can't tell if this pleases him or concerns him, but I don't particularly care because this is non-negotiable. Second condition, I continue, and this one is harder to say out loud because it requires acknowledging the attraction that's been simmering between us since the moment we met. The way my pulse races when he stands too close. The way his eyes linger on me sometimes like he's thinking. Thoughts that have nothing to do with trafficking victims and everything to do with the way my skirt fits when I lean over his desk to hand him documents. Is that whatever this is between us? This tension, this attraction, this complicated mess of professional boundaries and personal feelings doesn't interfere with the mission, which means we need to either acknowledge it and deal with it now, or we need to pretend it doesn't exist and maintain strict professional distance because I won't let these girls suffer because we were too busy navigating our complicated feelings to focus on actually saving them. The silence that follows is heavy with implications, with possibilities, with all the things neither of us has been willing to say out loud until now, and Dante crosses the space between us with the deliberate intensity of a man who's done pretending, who's done maintaining careful distance, who's decided that if we're going to work together on something this dangerous, then we might as well be honest about everything else too. He stops close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his body, can see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, can count his heartbeats in the pulse point at his throat. And when he speaks, his voice is rough with an emotion that makes my stomach flip and my heart race and my common sense scream that this is a terrible idea. I agree to your first condition, he says, his hand coming up to cut my face with a gentleness that contradicts everything I know about him, everything I've assumed about who he is and what he's capable of, and his thumb traces my cheekbone in a gesture that's simultaneously possessive and reverent. But I can't agree to your second condition, Arya, because I've spent 6 months pretending I don't think about you every moment you're not in this office, pretending I don't notice the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, pretending I don't want to know what you taste like, how you sound when you're not being professional and controlled, whether you'd still look at me the same way if you knew all the terrible things I've done in the name of building power in my father's organization. I can't pretend anymore. Can't maintain professional distance when all I want is to eliminate the distance entirely. And if that means we're going to complicate an already impossibly complicated situation, then so be it. Because life is short, and this work is dangerous. And I'd rather die knowing I was honest about wanting you than live with the regret of never finding out what we could have been if we'd both been brave enough to stop hiding behind professional boundaries and moral concerns about boss-secretary power dynamics. He kisses me before I can respond, before I can point out all the reasons this is a catastrophically bad idea, before I can remind him that mixing business with pleasure when the business in question involves international crime and family betrayal is probably the worst decision we could possibly make. And the kiss is everything I've imagined during the long nights when I couldn't sleep and pretended I wasn't thinking about him. Desperate, consuming. Like he's trying to claim every piece of me before someone else can. Like I'm the oxygen he needs to breathe, and he's been suffocating for 6 months, waiting for permission to inhale. My hands fist in his perfect suit jacket, pulling him closer, even though closer isn't physically possible unless we merge into the same person, and I'm kissing him back with an enthusiasm that would be embarrassing if I had any capacity left for embarrassment. Which I don't, because apparently I've decided that falling for my Mafia boss while agreeing to help him commit treason against his crime family is exactly the kind of life choice that makes sense at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. When we finally break apart, both breathing hard, his forehead pressed against mine in a gesture of intimacy that feels more profound than the kiss itself, I realize with crystal clarity that I've just agreed to something far more dangerous than helping Dante Russo save trafficking victims. I've agreed to let him into my heart, into my life, into all the carefully guarded spaces where I've hidden my hopes and fears, and desperate need to believe that broken people can save each other even when they're both drowning. And the most terrifying part is that I don't regret it. Don't want to take it back. Don't want to choose the safe option when the dangerous option is standing here holding me like I'm something precious and looking at me like I'm his last chance at redemption, wrapped up in a package of questionable judgment and a pencil skirt that's probably too tight for professional settings, but that I wear anyway, because I'm only human. And he's devastatingly attractive even when he's traumatizing me in wine cellars. So we're doing this, I say, and I'm not entirely sure if I'm talking about the mission to save trafficking victims, or the relationship that we've just catastrophically complicated, or the general state of our mutual insanity that led us both to this moment. But it doesn't really matter because the answer is the same regardless. We're partners, in every sense of the word. And we're going to save these girls and probably destroy your father's empire and possibly get ourselves killed in the process. And we're going to do it while navigating whatever this is between us. And if it all goes terribly wrong, at least we'll die knowing we tried to do something good in a world that desperately needs more people willing to try even when the odds are impossible, and the consequences are terrifying, and the smart money says we should run in the opposite direction as fast as humanly possible. Dante smiles at that. A real smile that transforms his face from dangerous to devastating, from crime boss to man who's found something worth fighting for beyond revenge and redemption. And he kisses me again. Softer this time, like a promise or a prayer, or maybe both. I'll take those odds, he murmurs against my lips, and I can feel his smile, can taste his hope, can sense the shift in him, from man carrying an impossible burden alone to man who's found someone willing to help carry it. And I know that 3 weeks from now, when everything goes catastrophically wrong, and I'm standing in a ballroom full of monsters trying not to get caught documenting their crimes, I'll think back to this moment and wonder if I should have run, should have chosen safety over purpose, should have protected myself instead of agreeing to help save people who've been told their entire lives that they're not worth saving. But right now, in this moment, with Dante's arms around me and the morning light streaming through the windows, and the file of girls who need us sitting on his desk like a promise we're both committed to keeping, I can't imagine making any other choice, can't imagine being anywhere else. Can't imagine wanting to be the kind of person who walks away when someone needs help, just because helping them might cost everything I am. And that realization, that fundamental understanding of who I am, and what I'm willing to risk, and why Dante chose me for this impossible mission, is both the most terrifying and the most exhilarating thing I've ever experienced, which probably says something deeply concerning about my psychological state, but I'm too busy kissing my Mafia boss to worry about that right now. 3 weeks into my new role as Dante's partner in what I've started, thinking of as Operation Save Everyone While Probably Dying. And I'm standing in a ballroom that looks like it was designed by someone who confused wealth with taste, wearing a dress that costs more than my entire college tuition and feels like liquid sapphire against my skin, every movement sending whispers of silk cascading down my body in a way that makes me hyper-aware of how exposed I am, how vulnerable, how completely out of my depth in this world of monsters wearing designer suits and practiced smiles that don't reach their cold, calculating eyes. Dante's hand rests possessively on my hip as we navigate through the crowd of men who've built empires on suffering, and women who've learned to ignore where the money comes from as long as it keeps flowing into their bank accounts, and to everyone here at his father's charity gala. The cruel irony of that phrase isn't lost on either of us. I'm his latest acquisition, pretty and young and expendable, another beautiful thing he's collected to display, like the art on the walls or the champagne and crystal flutes or the string quartet playing something classical and melancholy in the corner that nobody's actually listening to because they're too busy making deals and forging alliances and discussing business ventures that would make ordinary people physically ill if they understood what was really being negotiated beneath the polite conversation and false laughter. They have absolutely no idea that I'm memorizing faces with the systematic precision of someone who spent years documenting evidence for court cases. recording conversations with the device hidden in the diamond bracelet that Dante clasped around my wrist this evening with fingers that lingered just a moment longer than necessary, while his eyes promised things we didn't have time for before this event. Identifying which of these expensively dressed men, with their perfect teeth and manicured hands, are part of the trafficking ring that we're systematically working to dismantle from the inside out. One documented transaction at a time. The bracelet is a masterpiece of technological innovation, disguised as ostentatious jewelry. The kind of thing that wealthy men buy for their mistresses and wives to show off their financial prowess. But hidden within the glittering diamonds is a recording device so sophisticated that it can pick up conversations from 20 feet away and store enough data to bury half the people in this room, and every time someone glances at it with that particular expression of envy mixed with assessment. Calculating how much Dante must value me based on the size and quality of the stones, I have to resist the urge to laugh hysterically at how completely they've all underestimated what I'm actually doing here. This is my first real test in the field, my first time operating in the world that Dante has spent 15 years infiltrating and documenting, and the stakes couldn't be higher because somewhere in this mansion that belongs to his father Salvatore, the man who built an empire on broken girls and broken lives, and the fundamental belief that some people are commodities to be bought and sold rather than human beings deserving of dignity and freedom. There are victims being displayed for potential buyers, girls who've been drugged into compliance and dressed like expensive dolls and presented to men who see them as investments rather than people. And my job tonight is to locate them, while Dante keeps his father distracted with dutiful son performance art. To photograph the rooms and the security systems, and the faces of everyone involved. To gather evidence that will be used to coordinate a raid that we're planning with FBI contacts, who've agreed to look the other way, regarding Dante's involvement in exchange for the opportunity to bring down one of the largest trafficking operations on the East Coast. The weight of this responsibility sits heavy in my chest, mixing with the adrenaline that's been coursing through my veins since we arrived, with the fear that I'll make a mistake and blow our cover and get us both killed, with the strange exhilaration that comes from doing something that matters, something that could actually save lives, something that makes all those years of education and training and soul-crushing disappointment in the social work field suddenly feel like they were preparation for this exact moment, rather than a waste of time and money and naive idealism. As we dance, because of course we have to dance, have to sell the image of devoted couple, have to give everyone here a chance to assess our relationship and dismiss me as just another beautiful distraction in Dante's life. His mouth brushes my ear with the kind of intimacy that looks romantic to observers, but is actually him delivering critical information in a voice pitched so low that only I can hear it over the music and the ambient noise of 200 people pretending to enjoy themselves. "My father is watching you," he warns, and I can feel the tension in his body, despite the fluid grace with which he moves across the dance floor, can sense the carefully controlled violence that lives just beneath his civilized exterior. The predator pretending to be prey, or maybe the other way around, and his fingers tighten protectively on my waist, in a gesture that might look possessive to outsiders, but that I recognize as genuine concern for my safety. Genuine fear that his father will see through our performance and recognize me as a threat rather than an ornament. He's already asked me how much I paid for you, asked if you're as good as you look, asked if I'd be willing to share you with some of his business associates who are always looking for fresh entertainment. And I had to stand there and smile and make jokes about your value while every cell in my body wanted to kill him, for even suggesting that you could be bought or sold or shared like you're a thing instead of a person. The words should disgust me, should make me angry at Dante for participating in that conversation even as an act. But instead I feel his fingers tighten even more on my waist, feel the rage vibrating through him like a tuning fork struck too hard, and I understand that every word he spoke to his father cost him something, carved away another piece of his soul in service of this mission, in service of maintaining the cover that allows us to operate in this world without immediately being identified as threats and eliminated. "What did you tell him?" I ask, my voice steady, despite the fact that my heart is racing and my palms are sweating and every instinct I have is screaming that we're in danger, that Salvatore Russo is watching us with the kind of attention that suggests he suspects something isn't quite right about his son's new girlfriend. That we're one wrong word or gesture away from everything falling apart in the most catastrophic way possible. That you're priceless, Dante responds, and the raw honesty in his voice makes my heart do that complicated stuttering thing it's been doing ever since he kissed me in his office 3 weeks ago, and fundamentally altered the nature of our relationship in ways I'm still trying to process, and compartmentalize and pretend aren't affecting my ability to maintain professional distance and objectivity. And that if he touches you, if any of them touch you, if anyone in this entire godforsaken building so much as looks at you in a way that suggests they're considering whether you're available for purchase or lease or whatever the hell they call it, when they're pretending that buying human beings is just another business transaction, I'll start a war that will burn his entire empire to the ground and salt the earth so nothing can ever grow there again, and I don't care if it destroys me in the process because some things are worth dying for, and your safety is at the very top of that extremely short list. This is dangerous. Not just the mission. Not just the fact that we're surrounded by people who would kill us without hesitation if they knew what we were really doing here. But what I'm starting to feel for this man, who kills without remorse, but holds me like I'm something precious, who spent 15 years of his life planning revenge against his own father, for crimes that most people don't even want to acknowledge exist, who looks at me sometimes like I'm simultaneously his salvation and his damnation, like loving me is both the best and worst decision he's ever made. I shouldn't be falling for him. Shouldn't be letting my heart get involved in what should be a purely professional partnership focused on saving victims and dismantling a criminal empire. Shouldn't be thinking about the way he tastes, or the sounds he makes when I touch him, or the way he whispers my name in the dark, like it's a prayer, or a confession, or maybe both. But apparently my heart didn't get the memo about maintaining appropriate boundaries because it's doing its own thing entirely, racing whenever he's near, aching when he's in danger, singing with something that feels dangerously close to love when he looks at me the way he's looking at me right now, like I'm the only real thing in a room full of beautiful lies. The dance ends, and I excuse myself to the restroom with the practiced ease of someone who spent 3 weeks learning how to navigate high society events, how to move through spaces like I belong there, how to smile and make small talk and pretend I don't notice when men look at me like I'm something they'd like to own. And Dante releases me reluctantly, his fingers trailing down my arm in a gesture that looks romantic but is actually him reminding me to be careful, to stay alert, to remember that everyone here is dangerous, and I'm operating without a safety net in a world where mistakes are fatal. I navigate through the crowd with champagne flute in hand, prop rather than beverage because I need all my faculties sharp and unclouded, smiling at people whose names I've memorized along with their crimes, making my way toward the corridor that I've studied obsessively on the building plans that Dante obtained through contacts I probably don't want to know about. The corridor that should lead to the private suites, where Salvatore keeps the girls he's planning to sell tonight to the highest bidders, men who see human trafficking as an investment opportunity rather than a moral atrocity. My heart is pounding so hard, I'm surprised everyone in the ballroom can't hear it. Surprised it's not echoing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers and announcing my presence like a drumbeat signaling attack. But I force myself to breathe slowly, to move with the casual confidence of someone who belongs here, someone who has every right to wander through a mansion worth more than most people will earn in several lifetimes, someone who isn't currently committing what probably amounts to breaking and entering with intent to document federal crimes. The corridor is quieter than the ballroom, the sounds of the party fading behind me as I move deeper into the private sections of the house, past portraits of Salvatore and his ancestors looking stern and judgmental, past doors that are closed and probably locked, past security cameras that I have to trust Dante's people have looped or disabled or otherwise rendered useless for the next 20 minutes, which is all the time I have to find the girls, photograph everything, and get back to the party before someone notices my absence and starts asking questions that I can't answer without blowing our entire operation. I find them in a suite that's decorated like a luxury hotel room, all plush carpets and expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the gardens. 6 girls who look like they're ranging in age from maybe 16 to early 20s, dressed in evening gowns that probably cost thousands of dollars each, hair and makeup done by professionals, sitting in chairs arranged like they're posing for a photograph or waiting for an audition. And the youngest one has eyes that remind me of every failed case I worked during my time at Child Protective Services. Eyes that have seen too much too young. Eyes that have given up hoping for rescue because rescue never comes for girls like them, for girls who've been failed by every system that was supposed to protect them. My social worker instincts are screaming at me to get them out now, to grab all 6 of them and find the nearest exit and run until we're somewhere safe, somewhere far away from this mansion and these monsters and this world that treats human beings like merchandise. But Dante's voice is in my head reminding me that we need patience, that we need to identify all the buyers and all the players before we strike, that rushing in now will only save these 6 girls while leaving hundreds more trapped in the network, that sometimes you have to let your heart break a little bit longer in service of breaking something much bigger and more important. I'm photographing documents that are spread across a desk. Invoices, essentially, listing the girls by physical characteristics rather than names, listing their value based on age and appearance and level of compliance, making my stomach turn with rage and disgust and the kind of visceral horror that you can't ever completely wash off no matter how many showers you take or how many years pass. When I hear footsteps in the hallway, expensive shoes on marble floors, moving with the confidence of someone who owns this space and everything in it. And I have approximately 3 seconds to hide or explain my presence before whoever's coming through that door sees me standing here with my phone out, photographing evidence of human trafficking. And 3 seconds isn't enough time to do anything except accept that I've just made a catastrophic mistake and hope that whatever happens next doesn't result in Dante getting killed trying to save me. The door opens and Salvatore Russo stands in the doorway, and his smile is nothing like his son's. Where Dante's smiles are rare and genuine and transform his entire face, his father's smile is practiced and cold and doesn't reach his eyes, which are assessing me with the clinical detachment of a man who's spent decades evaluating merchandise and determining value. And I realize with sick certainty that he's looking at me the exact same way he looks at the girls sitting behind me in their expensive gowns, wondering what I'm worth, whether I'm something he'd like to add to his collection, whether his son's possession of me is something he can leverage or exploit, or simply take because he's Salvatore Russo, and taking what he wants is what he does. "Lost, my dear?" he asks, stepping into the room with the casual confidence of a predator who's never encountered anything more dangerous than himself. And his voice is smooth and cultured and completely devoid of the accent that colors Dante's speech. Like he's spent years erasing any trace of his origins, any hint that he came from somewhere less polished and refined than the empire he's built on the backs of broken girls and broken families. I force myself to play the role that Dante and I rehearsed obsessively during the 3 weeks leading up to tonight. Force myself to channel every vapid socialite I've ever observed, every woman who's learned to survive in dangerous spaces by pretending to be less intelligent than she is, less observant, less threatening, and I giggle, actually giggle like I'm a character in a romantic comedy, rather than a former social worker currently committing federal crimes in service of bringing down a human trafficking ring. And I let my words slur slightly as if I've had too much champagne, as if I'm drunk enough to have wandered away from the party without thinking about where I was going or what I might find. "I was looking for the powder room," I say, injecting just the right amount of embarrassment into my tone, letting my cheeks flush in a way that might be genuine mortification or might be the result of adrenaline and terror flooding my system in equal measure. And I tuck my phone into my small evening bag with movements that I pray look casual rather than suspicious. Movements that don't draw attention to what I was just doing, why I'm really here. These old mansions are so confusing. All these hallways look the same. And I think maybe I shouldn't have had that 3rd glass of champagne because everything is a little bit spinny, and I'm not entirely sure how I ended up here instead of the bathroom, which is embarrassing but also kind of funny if you think about it. And Dante is going to tease me mercilessly about getting lost in your beautiful home, and I'm so sorry for intruding on what I'm sure is a private space that I definitely shouldn't be in. Salvatore studies me for a long moment that stretches into eternity, and I can see him weighing my words, my body language, my flushed cheeks and slightly unfocused eyes, trying to determine if I'm genuinely just a drunk girl who wandered into the wrong room, or if I'm something more dangerous, something that needs to be eliminated before it becomes a threat to everything he's built. The girls behind me are silent, watching this interaction with the detached interest of people who've learned that their survival depends on not drawing attention to themselves, not interfering, not hoping that the random woman who stumbled into their prison might actually be here to help them. And I want to scream at them that I am here to help, that we're going to get them out, that they deserve better than this, and we're going to make sure they get it. But instead I just stand there giggling and swaying slightly, and praying that my performance is convincing enough to keep both of us alive. My son always did have expensive taste, Salvatore says finally, and the way he's looking at me makes my skin crawl, makes me want to shower until my skin is raw, makes me understand in a visceral way exactly what these girls feel when men look at them like objects to be appraised and purchased. And I force myself to smile like his comment is a compliment rather than an assessment of my market value. Force myself to keep breathing slowly and evenly instead of hyperventilating or running or doing any of the things my body desperately wants to do. He reaches out to touch my face, his fingers cold against my flushed skin, and I have to force myself not to flinch away, not to show any sign that his touch repulses me, not to reveal that every cell in my body is screaming danger and my training is telling me to assess exits and defensive options and whether I could realistically fight my way out of this room past a man who's probably armed and definitely dangerous and surrounded by security that would respond to any disturbance in seconds. That's when Dante appears in the doorway, like an avenging angel dressed in Tom Ford, and the temperature in the room drops approximately 10 degrees as father and son face each other across the space where I'm standing frozen, caught between them like a chess piece being fought over by players who've been at war for longer than I've been alive. And I can see the violence simmering in Dante's eyes despite the pleasant smile on his face, can see how close he is to abandoning 15 years of careful planning in favor of killing his father right here and now for daring to touch me, for looking at me like I'm something he might want to take from his son just because he can, just because taking things is what Salvatore Russo does best. Father, Dante says, and that single word contains multitudes, warning, threat, barely controlled rage wrapped up in a veneer of filial respect so thin it's practically transparent, and he moves into the room with the predatory grace I've come to recognize, positioning himself between me and his father in a gesture that might look casual to observers, but that I recognize as protective, possessive, a physical barrier between me and danger. I see you've met Aria. She has a terrible sense of direction after a few glasses of champagne, tends to wander off and get lost in the most inconvenient places, which is endearing most of the time, but occasionally results in her ending up in private sections of houses where she definitely shouldn't be, interrupting important business and making me look like I can't keep track of my own girlfriend, which is embarrassing for both of us, but particularly for me, since I'm supposed to be better at managing the things and people that belong to me. The words are deliberately chosen, playing into his father's worldview, reinforcing the image of me as possession rather than partner. And I can see the calculation in Salvatore's eyes as he weighs whether to push this confrontation or let it go, whether there's value in testing his son's boundaries right now, or if that's a battle better saved for another time. She's quite beautiful, Salvatore says, and it's not a compliment. It's an assessment, a statement of fact that carries implications I don't want to think about too carefully. And his eyes move from me to Dante with an expression that suggests he's noticed something about the way his son is standing, the tension in his shoulders, the barely controlled violence that's threatening to break through the civilized facade. You should be more careful with your possessions, Dante. Beautiful things have a tendency to attract attention, and not all of that attention is welcome or appropriate. And in our world, sometimes the things we value most become targets precisely because of how much we value them, which is a lesson you'll need to learn if you're going to survive in this business long enough to inherit what I've built. It's a threat disguised as fatherly advice, a reminder that Salvatore could hurt me if he wanted to, could take me from Dante just to prove that he can, could use me as leverage or punishment, or simply entertainment, because that's what men like him do to people they see as expendable. And I watch Dante's jaw clench as he processes this, as he weighs his response, as he calculates whether protecting me is worth revealing just how much I actually mean to him, which would give his father exactly the kind of ammunition he could use to destroy everything we're trying to build. "I appreciate your concern, Father," Dante says with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and his hand finds mine, warm and steady and grounding, pulling me gently toward the door and away from the girls I came here to document, away from the evidence we need, away from this confrontation that's threatening to spiral into violence or revelation or both. But I assure you I'm more than capable of taking care of what belongs to me, and anyone who thinks otherwise is welcome to test that theory, though I should warn them that the last person who tried to take something of mine ended up regretting it in ways that were both creative and permanent, which I think demonstrates quite effectively that some battles aren't worth fighting even if you think you might win. We leave the room together, Dante's hand on the small of my back, his body positioned between me and his father, in a way that makes it clear he's not just escorting me out, but protecting me, claiming me, drawing a line in the sand that his father can choose to respect or cross at his own risk. And I can feel the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, can feel my hands shaking with the aftermath of fear and the knowledge that we just barely avoided a disaster that could have ended with both of us dead, and the mission completely compromised. As we walk back toward the ballroom, moving through corridors that suddenly feel like they're closing in on me, walls pressing closer with each step, air getting thinner like we're climbing a mountain without oxygen, Dante leans down and whispers in my ear, with his lips brushing against my skin, in a way that sends shivers down my spine, despite the circumstances, despite the fact that we're surrounded by enemies, and his father is probably watching us leave and making plans that will definitely involve trying to hurt me or use me or both. "Are you all right?" he asks, and the genuine concern in his voice makes my chest ache, makes me want to cry or laugh or possibly both, makes me understand that we've crossed some kind of threshold tonight, that what happened in that room with his father watching and the girls sitting silent and Dante choosing to protect me instead of maintaining his cover has fundamentally altered something between us, has made real what was previously just potential, has transformed our partnership from something we chose into something we can't escape even if we wanted to, which I'm not entirely sure I do, despite the fact that wanting him is probably the most dangerous thing I've done in a life that's becoming increasingly full of dangerous things. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch you anywhere else? Did he say anything that I need to know about? Because if he did, if he made you uncomfortable or scared or feel unsafe in any way, then I don't care about the mission or the plan or the hundreds of girls we're trying to save. I will go back in there right now and end him, and consequences be damned, because some things matter more than revenge or justice or any of the principles I've built my entire adult life around." "I'm fine," I tell him. And it's mostly true, mostly accurate except for the part where my hands are still shaking and my heart is still racing, and I can still feel Salvatore's cold fingers on my face like a violation I can't wash off. But we don't have time for me to process trauma or fear or the reality of how close we just came to disaster, because we're walking back into the ballroom where 200 people are waiting to assess whether anything interesting happened during our absence, where we need to resume our performance as devoted couple who definitely aren't planning to destroy half the people in attendance. He didn't hurt me, just touched my face, just assessed me like I'm livestock being evaluated for purchase, which is apparently what passes for social interaction in your world. And I got some photographs of the documents before he arrived. Maybe not as many as we needed, but enough to identify at least some of the buyers, enough to move forward with the next phase of the operation, even if tonight didn't go exactly according to plan. The aftermath of the gala plays out in Dante's car as he drives with aggressive precision, taking turns too fast, accelerating harder than necessary, his knuckles white on the steering wheel and his jaw clenched so tight I'm worried he might crack teeth. And I understand that he's processing what happened tonight, processing how close his father came to touching me in ways that would have required response, processing the realization that loving me, because that's what this is, we've both stopped pretending otherwise, means giving his father a weapon that could be used to destroy everything we're trying to build, everyone we're trying to save. My father has a tendency to take things that don't belong to him, Dante says, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion, with the kind of rage that's been building for 15 years and threatens to explode at any moment, with fear for my safety that he's no longer trying to hide behind careful control and calculated responses. Things, people, lives, futures, he sees something he wants and he takes it. And he doesn't care about the cost or the consequences or the fact that some things aren't his to take. And if he had touched you, if he had hurt you, if he had done anything beyond what he did in that room, I would have killed him right there and burned down everything I've spent 15 years building, because you're worth more than revenge, more than justice, more than all the victims we're trying to save. And that probably makes me a terrible person, but I don't care anymore. I'm done pretending that I can maintain objectivity when it comes to you. Back at his mansion, which is starting to feel more like home than my own apartment that I barely visit anymore, because most nights I end up here, in his bed, in his arms, talking about the mission or the victims or the future we're trying to build together. He pulls me into his embrace with desperate intensity, his forehead pressed to mine in that gesture of intimacy that always undoes me, that always makes me feel like we're the only two people in the world, despite the fact that we're surrounded by enemies and complications, and a mission that could get us both killed. I can't lose you, he breathes against my lips, and I can feel his heart pounding against my chest, can feel the tremors running through his body, can understand that tonight scared him in a way that violence and danger and his father's threats never have, because all of those things are familiar territory. But the prospect of losing me is something new, something he hasn't learned how to handle, something that terrifies him more than death or failure or the possibility that his 15-year quest for revenge might end with him dead and his father still standing. Then don't let me go, I whisper back, and when he kisses me, it's desperate, consuming, like he's trying to claim every piece of me before someone else can, like he's trying to convince himself that I'm really here and safe and his. And I kiss him back with equal desperation, because tonight reminded me that this world we're operating in doesn't forgive mistakes, doesn't offer second chances, doesn't care that we're trying to do something good when the methods we're using are questionable at best and catastrophically illegal at worst. We make love that night with an intensity that borders on violence, all teeth and nails and breathless gasps, like we're trying to exorcise the fear and adrenaline in close call from our bodies, like we're trying to prove that we're alive and together, and nothing that happened tonight can change that. And afterward, lying in his arms with his fingers tracing patterns on my skin and his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I let myself believe for just a moment that we might actually survive this, might actually save those girls, might actually build something good from the ashes of something terrible, even though the rational part of my brain knows that the odds are against us, and the smart money says we're both going to end up dead or arrested or worse. But hope has never been particularly rational, and neither apparently am I when it comes to Dante Russo and his impossible mission, and the way he looks at me like I'm the answer to questions he's been asking his entire life without ever really expecting to find solutions. I wake up in Dante's bed wearing his shirt that still smells like his cologne and last night's desperate lovemaking. Morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the city, sprawled below us like a kingdom we're trying to save one victim at a time. And for a moment, just one perfect, stolen moment before reality crashes back in, I let myself pretend this is normal, that I'm not falling in love with a mafia boss who's planning to betray his own father, that last night's passion didn't fundamentally change the stakes of everything we're doing, that I'm not about to walk into the most dangerous operation of my life with nothing but hope and determination, and a partner whose love for me has become both our greatest strength and our most devastating vulnerability. Dante is already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching me with that intensity that used to make me nervous, but now just makes me feel seen, in a way I've never experienced before. Like he's memorizing every detail of my face, in case this is the last morning we have together, in case today is the day our careful planning falls apart, and we both pay the ultimate price for trying to do something good in a world built on suffering and silence. And when he reaches out to trace the curve of my jaw with fingers that are surprisingly gentle for a man capable of such violence, I lean into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun, helpless against the pull of him, the gravity of what we've become to each other. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Arya," he tells me, his voice rough with sleep and emotion, and all the things he usually keeps locked away behind walls constructed over 15 years of playing a role, being the dutiful son to a monster, building power in an organization he plans to destroy. And his thumb brushes across my lower lip in a gesture that's both possessive and reverent, like he can't quite believe I'm real, can't quite accept that someone like me would choose to stay with someone like him, despite knowing all the terrible things he's done in the name of building his cover, maintaining his position, surviving long enough to strike back. "But you won't be one of them. You're the best decision I've ever made, the only truly good thing in my life. The reason I still believe that redemption is possible even for men who've done things that would make ordinary people physically ill if they knew the full extent of the violence and manipulation and moral compromise required to infiltrate an organization like my father's. And whatever happens today at the warehouse, whatever goes wrong, because something always goes wrong, that's just the nature of operations like this. I need you to know that loving you has been worth every risk, every complication, every moment of terror that comes from caring about someone more than I care about my own survival." He explains that today is the day we've been building toward for 3 weeks, the day when all our planning and preparation and careful documentation culminates in the raid on the warehouse where his father keeps the bulk of his trafficking operation, the central hub where girls are processed and stored and prepared for distribution to buyers across the country and internationally. And the FBI is supposed to be our backup, supposed to arrive at precisely the right moment to secure the location and arrest everyone involved while providing us with cover and protection. But Dante and his loyal men, the handful of soldiers who've been secretly working with him for years, who share his disgust at what Salvatore has built, who believe that some lines shouldn't be crossed even in their world, are going in first to secure the victims, to make sure the girls are protected before the chaos of a federal raid potentially puts them in even more danger. It's dangerous, possibly suicidal, definitely not the kind of plan that anyone with functioning self-preservation instincts would agree to. But we're past the point of safe choices, past the point of turning back, past the point where we can pretend that we're not willing to risk everything for the chance to save people who've been told their entire lives that they're not worth saving, that nobody cares, that this is just their fate, and they should accept it with quiet compliance. At the warehouse on the industrial side of the city, where the buildings are abandoned and the streets are empty, and nobody asks questions about suspicious activity, because asking questions in neighborhoods like this is a good way to end up dead, everything goes wrong in exactly the way Dante predicted it would, in exactly the way I was hoping it wouldn't, because the FBI is late, stuck in traffic or delayed by bureaucracy, or possibly just operating on a different timeline than the one we were given. And Salvatore has doubled his security, has armed men positioned at every entrance and exit like he's expecting trouble. Like somehow he knows we're coming even though we've been so careful, so meticulous, so absolutely certain that our cover was intact and our planning was flawless. Dante realizes immediately that something is wrong, that the security presence is too heavy, that the timing is too suspicious, that we've either been betrayed or anticipated or both, and he tells me to stay in the car, to wait for the FBI, to let him and his men handle this without putting myself in danger. But even as he's giving me these instructions, I can see through the windshield that they're bringing girls out. Not to safety, not to freedom, but to trucks that are clearly meant for evacuation, for disappearing the evidence before law enforcement arrives, for making sure that even if we bring down this location, there won't be any victims left to testify or any evidence left to prosecute. I can't let that happen. Can't sit in this car while girls who've already suffered more than anyone should have to suffer are loaded into trucks and driven to some other nightmare location where we might never find them again, where they might disappear completely into a system designed to make people vanish. So I do the stupidest and bravest and most reckless thing I've ever done in a life that's becoming increasingly full of stupid, brave, reckless decisions. I grab the gun from the glove compartment that Dante made me practice with during our preparation, even though I insisted I would never need it, even though the weight of it in my hands makes me feel sick, because guns represent everything I've spent my life trying to oppose. And I run toward that warehouse while Dante is engaged in a firefight with his father's men, while bullets are flying and people are shouting, and the whole situation is deteriorating into exactly the kind of chaos that gets people killed. Inside the warehouse, which smells like concrete and fear, and the particular hopelessness that comes from being trapped in a system that sees you as merchandise, I find the girls that I'm looking for, find them huddled together in a storage room that's been converted into a makeshift holding cell. But I also find the truth that I wasn't expecting. The betrayal that makes everything we've done suddenly make terrible sense. Gia, Dante's cousin, the girl who played the victim in his basement test, is standing with Salvatore. And the expression on her face is triumphant rather than afraid, is calculating rather than surprised, is the face of someone who's been playing a long game and has finally revealed her hand at the moment when it will do maximum damage. "Did you really think Dante was the only one who could play games?" she asks me, and I can see her enjoying this. Enjoying the moment of revelation. Enjoying the knowledge that she's been several steps ahead of us the entire time, that every move we made was observed and reported, that our careful planning was never really secret because she was feeding information to Salvatore all along, using her position as Dante's trusted cousin to undermine everything he was trying to build. He's going soft, just like his mother did before she tried to leave and father had to eliminate her, had to make it look like suicide so nobody would question it, had to remove the weakness from our family before it infected the entire organization. Dante was supposed to take over the empire, was supposed to become even more powerful and ruthless than his father. But instead he's trying to dismantle it because of some misguided sense of morality inherited from a woman who was weak, who was a victim herself before father made her into something more, who could never accept what our family is, or what we do, or why it's necessary in a world that runs on power and money and the willingness to do whatever it takes to maintain both. Salvatore emerges from the shadows like a villain in a movie, like every nightmare I've had since that night at the gala, and his smile is the smile of a man who's won, who's anticipated every move we could make and countered it before we even knew we were in checkmate. "My son was brilliant until you came along," he tells me. And there's genuine regret in his voice. Like he actually mourns the loss of what Dante could have been if I hadn't corrupted him with concepts like empathy and redemption. Like he's disappointed that his carefully crafted heir has been ruined by falling in love with someone who made him remember he has a conscience. He would have been perfect, ruthless, efficient, capable of running this empire with the kind of vision I've always known he possessed. But you made him weak. Made him believe that saving these worthless girls is more important than maintaining power. Made him think that his mother's death was a tragedy rather than a necessary elimination of weakness. And now I have to eliminate you before you destroy everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed for, everything that makes this family powerful and feared and respected in our world. They give me a choice that's designed to destroy me regardless of what I pick. Call Dante and tell him it's a trap. Watch him die when he rushes in to save me because that's what men in love do. That's the weakness Salvatore is counting on? Or run? Save myself. Abandon these girls and the man I love and live with the knowledge that my cowardice led to deaths I could have prevented if I'd been braver, stronger, more willing to sacrifice myself for the greater good. Salvatore presses a phone into my hand, and the girls behind me are crying. And I can hear gunfire outside growing closer, growing more intense. And I think about Dante, about the man who held me last night like I was his salvation, who's spent 15 years planning revenge for a mother I never met, but whose legacy lives in every choice he makes, who looked at me and saw someone worth protecting, worth loving, worth building a future with, despite knowing that future might be measured in hours rather than years. And I make my choice with the kind of certainty that comes from finally understanding who you are and what you're willing to die for. I don't call Dante because calling him would be trading his life for mine, and that's not a trade I'm willing to make. Not when he's been fighting this fight for 15 years. Not when he deserves the chance to see his father's empire burn, even if I'm not alive to witness it. So instead, I start untying the girls with hands that are shaking, but determined, moving as fast as I can, while Salvatore watches with an expression that suggests he expected this. That my predictability is both my greatest strength and my fatal flaw. That choosing to save others at the cost of my own survival is exactly what he knew I would do, because that's who I am at my core. You're making a mistake, Salvatore warns, raising his gun with the casual ease of a man who's killed before and will kill again without losing sleep, without questioning whether it was justified, without carrying the weight that I know Dante carries every day for the violence he's committed in service of his cover. He'll die trying to save you. Die knowing that his weakness for you is what destroyed him. Die understanding that love is always a liability in our world. That caring about someone more than you care about power is the fastest way to lose everything. And his death will be on your conscience, along with all the girls you didn't save because you were too stubborn to make the smart choice when you had the chance. I meet Salvatore's eyes, and I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Never been more clear about who I am and what I stand for and why I'm willing to die for it. And I can feel the weight of the gun in the waistband of my jeans where I tucked it. Can calculate the odds of reaching it before he shoots me. Can accept that those odds are terrible, but that trying is better than not trying. That going down fighting is better than going down begging. Then he'll die knowing I saved them, I say. And my voice doesn't shake even though my hands are trembling, doesn't waver even though I'm terrified, doesn't betray the fact that I'm about to attempt something that will probably get me killed, but that I have to try anyway. Because that's what you do when you're the only thing standing between victims and their abusers. And you'll spend the rest of your life, however long or short that life turns out to be, knowing that your son was twice the man you ever were, that he chose love over power, that he tried to save people instead of destroying them, that he became something better than what you made him. And that legacy will outlive both of us, will outlive this empire you've built on suffering, will mean something long after everyone's forgotten your name and the terrible things you did in service of maintaining power that ultimately meant nothing, because power without purpose is just violence dressed up in expensive suits and empty justification. The gun goes off just as the doors burst open and Dante comes through them like an avenging angel covered in blood that I hope isn't his, screaming my name with a desperation that breaks my heart, even as darkness rushes in from the edges of my vision, and I'm not sure if I'm falling or flying, but I hear him, hear the raw agony in his voice, hear him promising things I can't quite make out over the ringing in my ears. And my last conscious thought before everything goes black is that at least the girls are free. At least we tried. At least we chose to fight even when the odds were impossible. And if this is how my story ends, then at least it ends meaning something. Mattering to someone. Making a difference in a world that desperately needs more people willing to. I wake up 3 days later to the sound of machines beeping in steady rhythm like a heartbeat that's not my own. To the antiseptic smell of hospital rooms that triggers memories of sitting beside my mother during her chemotherapy treatments. To the sensation of someone holding my hand with desperate gentleness, like they're afraid I might shatter if they grip too hard. And when I finally manage to force my eyes open against the weight of exhaustion and painkillers, the first thing I see is Dante sitting in the chair beside my bed, with his head resting on the edge of the mattress. Dark circles under his eyes that suggest he hasn't slept since the warehouse. Stubble covering his jaw that makes him look younger and more vulnerable and utterly destroyed by the fear of losing me. His lips are moving in what I eventually recognize as Italian prayer, the words soft and desperate and raw in a way I've never heard from him before, like he's bargaining with a god he's not sure he believes in, offering anything and everything in exchange for my survival. And when he realizes I'm awake, when my fingers tighten weakly around his, and his head jerks up with an expression of such profound relief that it makes my chest ache. The tears that spill down his cheeks are completely unguarded, completely honest. The tears of a man who spent 3 days believing he'd lost the only good thing in his life because he wasn't fast enough, wasn't careful enough, wasn't able to protect me the way he'd promised himself he would. "You're awake," he says, and his voice is wrecked, absolutely destroyed by 3 days of grief and guilt and the kind of prayer that comes from desperation rather than faith. And he's pressing kisses to my knuckles, my wrist, my palm, like he's trying to convince himself that I'm real, that I'm alive, that I'm still here despite the bullet that should have killed me but instead just shattered my shoulder and left me with scars that will fade but memories that probably won't. "You're awake and you're alive, and I thought, God, Arya, I thought I'd lost you. Thought I'd gotten you killed because I was too arrogant to consider that my own cousin would betray me. Too focused on my father to see the threat that was standing right beside me the entire time. Too in love with you to think clearly about the risks I was exposing you to by bringing you into my world, into my war, into a fight that should have been mine alone and that you should never have been anywhere near. Through the fog of painkillers and exhaustion, through the dull ache in my shoulder that's being held together by surgery and pins and the kind of medical intervention that costs more than I want to think about. Dante explains everything with a voice that keeps breaking on the edges of words, keeps catching on the guilt and relief that are warring for dominance in his expression. The bullet hit my shoulder instead of my heart, because one of the girls I'd been untying, a 16-year-old named Maya, who'd been trafficked from Ukraine 6 months ago, attacked Salvatore at the exact moment he pulled the trigger, throwing off his aim just enough that what should have been a fatal shot became survivable, became the kind of injury that hurts like hell and requires extensive physical therapy. But that doesn't steal your life, doesn't end your story before you've had a chance to see how it turns out. The FBI arrived seconds after Dante burst through those warehouse doors, arrived in time to witness Salvatore Russo standing over my bleeding body with a gun in his hand, and 24 witnesses, including his own men, who'd switched sides during the firefight, who'd decided in that moment that there were some lines even they weren't willing to cross, that shooting an unarmed woman who was trying to save trafficking victims was a bridge too far, even for men who'd spent their lives doing terrible things in service of maintaining power and position. Salvatore and Gia are in federal custody, along with 43 other men who were involved in various aspects of the trafficking operation, and all 22 girls from the warehouse are safe. Not just physically safe, but actually being cared for in facilities that specialize in trauma recovery, that understand what these girls have been through, that are committed to helping them rebuild lives that were stolen from them by men who saw them as commodities rather than human beings. "You saved them," Dante tells me, and the pride in his voice is mixed with anguish, with the knowledge that I almost died saving people he'd spent 15 years trying to protect, with the understanding that my courage and recklessness and fundamental inability to walk away from people who need help nearly cost him everything. "You almost died. You were bleeding out in my arms while I screamed for help and promised things I had no right to promise. But you saved them all. Every single girl in that warehouse is alive because you refused to make the smart choice, because you chose them over your own safety, because you're the kind of person who runs toward danger when everyone else is running away. And I don't know whether to worship you for that or lock you somewhere safe where you can never scare me like that again. But I can see the guilt eating him alive, can see that he's been sitting here for 3 days, blaming himself for bringing me into his world, for falling in love with me, for letting me become his weakness that his father exploited. And I need him to understand something that I'm not sure he's capable of believing, given how thoroughly he's been conditioned to see love as liability rather than strength. I need to tell you something, Dante says before I can speak, and the vulnerability in his voice terrifies me more than any gun ever could. More than Salvatore's cold smile or Gia's betrayal, or the moment when I knew I was about to die. Because this is Dante stripped of all his defenses, all his careful control, all the armor he's built over 15 years of playing a role and pretending to be someone he's not. About my mother. About why I've spent 15 years planning this revenge. About why destroying my father's empire became the only thing that mattered until I met you, and suddenly realized that revenge isn't enough. That tearing down what he built doesn't actually heal what he destroyed, that the only way forward is to build something better, rather than just burning everything to the ground and walking away. He tells me about his mother with tears streaming down his face, tells me how she was trafficked as a teenager from a small village in southern Italy, how Salvatore bought her from the men who'd smuggled her into the country, how she spent 20 years in a gilded cage being told she should be grateful that he married her instead of just using her and discarding her like he did with so many others, how she tried to escape when Dante was 17 because she couldn't bear the weight of what her husband did, couldn't live with the knowledge that the money paying for her son's education came from girls just like she'd been, couldn't pretend anymore that staying was survival rather than complicity. Salvatore killed her when he found out about her escape plan, staged it to look like suicide, made sure there would never be any investigation or questions or consequences, and Dante came home from boarding school to find his mother dead, and his father explaining in calm, reasonable tones that weakness had to be eliminated, that she'd chosen death over loyalty, that this was a lesson Dante needed to learn about the cost of caring more about morality than about family and power and the fundamental rules that govern their world. I've spent 15 years building power for one purpose: to destroy everything my father built on the backs of broken women like my mother, to burn his empire to the ground so nothing could ever grow there again, to make sure that every girl he trafficked was freed and every man he worked with was held accountable. But I was drowning in the darkness of it. Drowning in the violence and manipulation and moral compromise required to maintain my cover. Drowning in the knowledge that every day I waited was another day that girls suffered while I played the dutiful son and pretended I didn't care. His hands are shaking as he holds mine, and I can feel the tremors running through his entire body. Can understand that he's been carrying this weight for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to stand without it crushing him. Until you walked into my office 6 months ago, looking terrified and determined in equal measure, answering my questions with the kind of honesty that suggested you hadn't learned yet, that honesty in my world gets you killed. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward. That maybe I could build something good instead of just destroying something evil. That maybe redemption was actually possible even for men who've done terrible things in the name of eventually doing something good. During my recovery, which stretches across weeks of physical therapy and FBI interrogations and sleepless nights where I wake up screaming from nightmares about Salvatore's gun and the moment when I thought I was going to die, the federal investigators offer Dante immunity in exchange for testimony against his father and the entire network of corrupt officials and business associates who made the trafficking operation possible. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead investigator who spent the last 5 years trying to build a case against Salvatore Russo, pulls me aside one afternoon when Dante is out of the room and tells me something I already know but that she needs to say anyway, that Dante has been their anonymous informant for 2 years, that every piece of evidence they have came from him risking his life to document his father's crimes, that the immunity deal isn't charity, but recognition that sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become one temporarily, to infiltrate their world and learn their secrets, and use that knowledge to bring them down from the inside. Is he worth it? She asks me, and I can see the genuine curiosity in her expression, can understand that she's trying to reconcile the man who's responsible for saving dozens of lives with the man who's also responsible for violence and manipulation and all the terrible things required to maintain a cover in organized crime. Is a man born into that world, raised by a monster, trained to become something terrible? Actually capable of redemption? Or are we all just fooling ourselves because we want to believe that people can change when really we're just enabling someone who's fundamentally broken to continue existing in spaces where he shouldn't be allowed? I tell her the truth, which is that I don't know if anyone is truly capable of redemption, if past actions can be erased by future good deeds, if love is enough to transform someone who's been shaped by violence and trauma and 15 years of playing a role that required him to do terrible things. But I know that Dante is trying. That he spent half his life planning to destroy his father's empire, even knowing it might cost him everything. That he looks at me sometimes like I'm proof that goodness exists in a world that's tried to convince him otherwise. And if that's not worth fighting for, then I don't know what is. 6 months after the warehouse, after the trial where Dante testified for 3 days straight about his father's crimes, while Salvatore stared at him with an expression of betrayal so profound it was almost painful to witness, after the sentencing that put his father away for life without parole and dismantled the trafficking network that had operated for 2 decades, after the media circus that painted Dante as either hero or villain, depending on which news source you believed. We're standing in a bright, renovated brownstone in Brooklyn that we bought with money from Dante's legitimate businesses, the ones that were never connected to his father's empire, the ones he built carefully over years as insurance against the day when he'd need to walk away from organized crime entirely and build a new life from the ground up. The brownstone is a safe house and rehabilitation center for trafficking victims, a place where 12 of the girls we saved are currently living and learning and healing and rebuilding lives that were stolen from them. And Dante teaches them self-defense every Saturday morning with a patience and gentleness that never fails to make my chest ache because I can see the ghost of his mother in every gesture. Can understand that this is his way of giving her the ending she deserved, the escape she never got, the future that was taken from her by a man who saw love as weakness and compassion as liability. I run the therapy programs with the social work degree I thought I'd never use again, with the training I'd abandoned when the system broke me, with a renewed sense that maybe I can actually help people when I have resources and support, and a partner who understands that saving people requires more than good intentions, requires money and time, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to give victims the tools they need to become survivors, and eventually, hopefully, people who don't define themselves by their trauma at all. We're both testifying at trials almost monthly as Dante's documentation leads to arrests across the country and internationally. And yes, we're looking over our shoulders because there are still people who want revenge for what we did. Still men who see Dante's betrayal as unforgivable regardless of his motivations. Still threats that arrive in our mailbox and our email, and sometimes in more direct, more violent forms that require us to maintain security systems and bodyguards and a level of vigilance that's exhausting but necessary. Tonight, after the girls are asleep, and the security system is armed, and the brownstone is quiet except for the sounds of the city outside our windows, Dante pulls me onto the rooftop terrace that we converted into a garden, into a space where we can breathe and think and remember that there's beauty in the world alongside all the darkness we've witnessed, and the city glitters below us like a carpet of stars, like possibilities waiting to be explored, like a future that we're building together one day at a time, one saved life at a time, one small act of redemption at a time. He's holding a small velvet box that makes my breath catch in my throat, even though I've been expecting this for weeks, even though we've talked about marriage and future, and building something permanent together in between the trials and the therapy sessions and the nightmares that still wake us both up sometimes. And when he opens it, the ring inside catches the moonlight in a way that reminds me of the bracelet I wore to his father's gala, the one that recorded evidence that helped bring down an empire built on suffering. I'm not a good man, Arya, Dante tells me, and I can see the boy who lost his mother in his eyes, the man who's fought for redemption in every scar that marks his body, the partner who stood beside me through everything and never once suggested that I should have chosen differently, should have walked away, should have protected myself instead of running toward danger. I've killed people who threatened my cover. I've done things in the name of maintaining my position that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I've made choices that I can't take back, and that I'm not sure I'd change even if I could, because those choices led me here. To you. To this moment. To the possibility of building something good from the ashes of something terrible. But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to if you say yes to this. You're agreeing to spend your life with a man who has blood on his hands and enemies at his door, and a past that will never fully go away, no matter how much good we do moving forward. I'm asking you to marry a man who will always be looking over his shoulder, who will always carry the weight of the things he's done, who will always be the son of a monster even though he's spent years proving he's nothing like his father. And I'm asking you to build a life with me knowing that life will be complicated and dangerous and full of challenges that most people never have to face. But I'm also promising you that every day I wake up beside you is a day when I believe redemption is possible, when I believe that broken people can heal each other, when I believe that love isn't weakness but the only thing strong enough to transform monsters into men. He kneels in front of me on the terrace with the city spread out behind him, like a canvas we're going to paint together. And his hands are shaking as he holds out the ring, as he waits for my answer, as he gives me one final chance to choose the safe option, the easy path, the life where I'm not constantly worried that someone will hurt him, or me, or the people we're trying to protect. I look at this beautiful, broken, dangerous man who stepped into hell to save people he'd never met, who held me through nightmares and celebrated small victories, and never once made me feel like my compassion was weakness or my determination was naivety. Who's building something good from the wreckage of something evil because he believes, we both believe, that the only way to fight darkness is to create more light. And I think about the girl I was 6 months ago, desperate and drowning and convinced that passion couldn't coexist with survival, and the woman I am now, stronger and scarred, and standing beside someone who sees my scars as proof of courage rather than evidence of damage. Yes, I whisper. And when he slides the ring onto my finger, it feels like a promise, like a beginning, like proof that even in the darkest places, even in the most broken circumstances, even when the odds are impossible and the enemies are everywhere, love can still take root and grow and transform everything it touches. And maybe that's what redemption actually is. Not erasing the past or pretending the damage never happened, but choosing every single day to build something better, to be something better, to believe that broken people can save each other even when they're both still learning how to save themselves. The city sprawls below us, full of secrets and sins and people who are suffering in ways we can't see, can't prevent, can't fix no matter how hard we try. But up here in his arms, with the ring on my finger and his heart beating steady beneath my palm, and the future stretching out before us full of uncertainty and possibility in equal measure, I've never felt safer, never felt more certain that I made the right choice, never felt more convinced that some risks are worth taking even when the cost might be everything. Because the Mafia boss found his secretary crying in his basement. Except I wasn't crying. I was trying to save someone who didn't need saving, was being tested without knowing it, was being evaluated for a role I didn't understand. And what he did next didn't just shock me, it changed both our lives forever. Gave us both a chance at redemption we didn't know we deserved. Proved that even people born into darkness can choose to create light. And sometimes, the most powerful act of rebellion against a world built on suffering is simply refusing to stop believing that love and hope and stubborn determination can actually make a difference. One saved life at a time. One small act of courage at a time. One choice to keep fighting even when everything suggests you should surrender. And if that's not a legacy worth building, worth dying for, worth spending the rest of our complicated, dangerous, beautiful lives creating together, then I don't know what is.